Welcome back, pilots, to Squadrons Update. Today we'll be doing things a little differently, and rather than a formal news video, which I'll probably save that stuff for later for a separate video, as it doesn't really jive with the contents of this video, which turned out to be far longer than I anticipated, but anyways. In this Squadrons update, we'll be talking about the Clone Wars, why it wasn't included in Squadrons, as well going over a potential leak that suggests that we could maybe still be seeing something Clone Wars related in the game, at least in the single player component of Squadrons. And before we get into any of that, but a quick reminder, as if you do like these type of videos, then do remember to give it a like to show your support for not only this update series, but also the content within it. With that out of the way, let's get into it. So, as I mentioned before, the main topic that has to be talked about and kind of explained is, of course, the exclusion of the Clone Wars, and why Squadrons isn't basing itself during the prequels, but rather instead at the end of the original trilogy. A decision that has certainly riled the feathers of many die-hard Clone Wars fans, with many demanding to know why they were cheated out of their favorite era. Now, ever since the reveal of Squadrons, I've been seeing so many people express their frustration and disappointment at EA and Motive for choosing to not focus Squadrons in the prequel era, but as well excluding other eras and making it a one-era only game, which in turn many see as a step backwards. And yeah, these are all fair criticisms, especially since we're coming right out of Battlefront 2 that features ground and space combat for all three eras. So it's only natural that people would be upset considering how much DICE spoiled us in that regard. But the truth of the matter is, Clone Wars simply wouldn't work in Squadrons. At least not as intended by Motive as the lone era that the game would be based off of. And the reasons for this are kind of simple, but let me go one by one. First off, customization. Squadron prides itself on the customization of both pilots and starfighters, allowing players to play as whatever gender and race they want, which obviously wouldn't work if Squadrons was Clone Wars only, because as the clones you wouldn't be able to change neither gender or race, leaving the only customization options available to you as smaller visual ones, like changing your haircut or giving your clone a tattoo or something like that. And this is especially important considering today's political climate, where people would complain how Squadrons lacks diversity options and it's a male-only dominated focused game. Then if Motive were to introduce female Jango clones, they would still get an angry mob for that because it's not lore accurate. Just because DICE were able to forcefully add women into Battlefield 5 and make an excuse that it was an alternative take on World War II to make it work, well, that wouldn't really work here for Motive as this game is supposed to be canon. So they'd be damned if they do and damned if they don't. As for the droids, forget about it. Considering droid starfighter pilots didn't exist for the Separatists, so you'd literally be playing as the starfighters themselves, like the Vulture, Hyena, Tri-Droid, and Droid Gunship, which rather than making one custom pilot per faction, you'd instead have to make 4 custom pilots / starfighters for the Separatists, as each droid ship is technically its very own pilot. So yeah, as we can see, that has a lot of different problems which Motive didn't really need when making this game. And if customization wasn't the only problem, we can't forget about the single player campaign too, which while it would be perfectly fine for the clones, don't get me wrong there, on the other hand, it would be far more difficult to write and do for the Separatists. Since again, you'd have 4 separate pilots rather than just one who can change to whatever ship they want on the fly. Not to mention, let's face it, a droid starfighter campaign probably wouldn't be the most interesting campaign out there, especially considering how little personality the droid starfighters have too. Now if the B-1 battle droids were pilots of these droid starfighters instead, then yeah, that would be funny to watch and play. But unfortunately, that's not the case here, and Motive would have all these limitations that they'd have to deal with when writing a single-player story for the Separatists. Now as for why Squadrons isn't based in on the sequel trilogy, then that's mainly to do with the gameplay and story elements than customization, as there really isn't any wiggle room within the canon story to pit large fleet battles between the First Order and the Resistance. Not to mention the Resistance is far too small of a faction to have proper fleet battles and a compelling single-player story to go with it. So in closing, choosing to have Squadrons be based within the end of the OT rather than the PT or ST is because it was simply the more safe and most flexible era for Motive to work with. That's because with that era you have no problems with freedom over customization with the pilots per faction, can write an interesting story featuring the viewpoints of the pilots in both factions, have the canon lore to back up all of these large fleet battles, have a piece of the OT timeline that is still largely unexplored, meaning more potential for good stories to be told, and of course get to work with the most iconic ships of the entire Star Wars franchise. I know Motive choosing Squadrons to be OT focused rather than PT or even ST is not something most people are happy with, and I get that. But the point of me talking about all of this is to explain the reason and justification on why they did what they did. Now, that's not to say Motive can't add the PT or ST eras as DLC later down the road for multiplayer and not single player, which definitely would make fans of those eras very happy. But considering Squadrons is only a smaller side project for EA, then it's extremely doubtful, and also most likely one of the reasons why those eras weren't included already in the multiplayer portion to begin with, all likely because of budget constraints for the project. That said, there is a small chance that the Clone Wars could still be represented in Squadrons, at least in the single-player campaign according to a so-called leak. Well, I'd call it more of a rumor than anything, but that's mainly on account that there is literally nothing to verify this claim at this time. As according to a Reddit user called NoNoMan12, they state that they heard a small leak from a scooper regarding Squadrons, and that Anakin's 501st pilot, Hawk, will appear in the main story as a New Republic pilot trainer. Now whether he got his ship out or met with Rex and the other clones, they don't know that. Nor do they know how big of a role he plays in the campaign. But apparently he's voiced and mocapped by Tamura Morrison instead of D. Bradley Baker. And this is due to the more realistic style of the graphics, at least of the claim they're making here. Now, it goes without saying, take this rumor with an absolute grain of salt. Unlike leakers like some_info from the Battlefront community who has a proven track record of their leaks being legit, and thus we can trust with their leaks having truth to them, than this person with no history of leaking information whatsoever. Now, that's not to say this rumor can't come true, but again, take this with a grain of salt. Don't put too much hope into this happening, but if it does, then that would be really awesome. With that all said, Tamura Morrison has been getting pretty active again with Star Wars projects, especially with his rumored roles as Boba Fett and Rex in The Mandalorian Season 2. And hey, he did voice Boba Fett in all of DICE's games, so I can totally see Morrison agreed to be included in Squadrons if offered a part in it. Not just that, but it would be incredibly interesting to see another unshipped clone now part of the Alliance/New Republic. As to date, we've only known of Rex, Wolf, and Gregor who had done that. Now, considering there were millions or billions of clones, then it is believable that some could pop up here and there and now helping the good guys. Besides, who doesn't want to see more clones show up in the OT era too? So if this rumor does turn out to be true, then that would certainly be a win-win for everyone. And hey, as we know in canon, Hawk himself could very well still be alive during the OT era, as he never did die in the Clone Wars, which is good as technically he was supposed to get killed off in the Clone Wars movie by a gunship. But thankfully that sequence was ultimately cut from the movie, saving Hawk from death in the process. But what do you all think about the rumor of Hawk potentially showing up in Squadrons? And do you agree with why Motive couldn't have done Clone Wars as the main era for Squadrons, especially with all the limitations I pointed out? If not, let me know down in the comments below and let's start a discussion on it. Again, I think it would be awesome if Squadrons was based within the Clone Wars, but I completely understand the reasons why Motive decided against doing that, and hopefully the people giving Motive trouble about it will now too. Until the next time, this will do it for your Squadrons update. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to not only support it, but also keep up with Star Wars news, gaming, and canon lore released every week. And consider following me on Twitter and Facebook to never miss out on the latest Star Wars content. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.